What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, July 16th, 2018, starting a brand new week here, halfway through the month, getting well and truly into summer, although it's been a little cool so far this year. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today, and the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Our third hour guest today will be Daniel Amaduri from Future Money Trends. And our Thursday guest will be Leon Siu, talking about the independent kingdom of Hawaii. So we're going to be looking on that. And let me just take care of that. Okay. So getting into the news here, a lot of stuff going on. Obviously, the big news being that Trump and Putin had their summit meeting in Helsinki earlier today. Trump is already back in the air, going off to where his next thing is. It seemed to go really well, which was very annoying to those whose lives are very much tied up with war. They want war, or at least the appearance of war. You know, the Russians are evil. The Russians are evil. Give me all your money and your children. I'll save you from those evil Russians. Just take my word for it. They're evil. And so they're all out there whining and crying. And there is no doubt that Robert Mueller's indictment of 12 alleged GRU agents for interfering in the 2016 election at this time was an attempt to throw a monkey wrench into the works. And it's another PR stunt. It's propaganda. It's an indictment of 12 individuals who will never contest the charges, will not have to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. It's playing to the court of public opinion. It's pure propaganda. On the other hand, Putin came on out and literally dared Mueller, said if the investigation sends an official request to question the suspects, Russia will do that. They will cooperate with the Mueller investigation. So I'll bet Mueller just quiets down real rapidly on that one. Because remember the last time they indicted Russians for hacking, and they didn't think anybody was going to show up, but they did. And Mueller had to go into court. We tried to basically deny the right of discovery by the defense attorneys, tried to get the court to impose silencing orders, a blackout. That didn't work either. So Putin is basically calling Mueller's bluff on that one, and good for Putin on that one. Now, interestingly enough, before Trump and Putin had their meeting, the U.S. president listed the European Union, China, and Russia as economic foes in an interview. And, of course, complained about Germany and its contributions to NATO, as well as going along with the pipeline deal with Russia. So Trump is out there throwing his weight around, or throwing the nation's weight around. And I think it would have been more prudent to say competitors rather than foes, because it's basically taking what is considered healthy economics, competition, improves quality, lowers prices, turning it into warfare, which is what is unfortunately going on now with China. But Trump began the Helsinki summit by blaming U.S. foolishness and stupidity for tensions with Russia, railing against the rigged witch hunt and crooked Hillary, and basically it was interesting when they were taking questions, when they had the press conference after that, all of the American media was always about the collusion, the investigation. And you could tell by the look on Trump's face, he's really had it. So have I. It's been 18 months. They've been pushing this nonsense. They haven't come up with any proof. But Trump is certainly correct that the deteriorating relations with Russia are coming from the U.S. government, from the warmongers, from the war profiteers, from the defense contractors, the military-industrial complex. And the media is still on this Russian meddling. Now, Putin actually addressed that issue. And he admitted he wanted Trump to be the president, but says money was moved out of Russia illegally, but it didn't go to the Trump campaign. It went to Hillary Clinton. So there's a new development. Is anybody going to take a look at that over at Robert Mueller's office? Probably not. They want Hillary to have her shot in 2020. They can't investigate Hillary no matter what she's done. She's the anointed one. So basically Trump has rejected the meddling nonsense, as we all should, and made some moves to make peace with Russia, to cool things down. And again, the corporate news media, which has tried to keep everything about the alleged Russian meddling instead of world peace. And I can tell by his face he's tired of it. I'm tired of it too. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Now back here, reactions to the Putin-Trump summit have been mixed. Rand Paul came on out, thought it was absolutely wonderful. A lot of people have come on out. Others, not so much. And a lot of lawmakers blasted Trump over his uncritical comments toward Russia, calling it shameful, dangerous, and verging on treason, that he should have been out there like Khrushchev used to do. Take off the shoe, bang it on the desk, and say, "We will bury you." And Senator Jeff Flake, who's a fellow Republican but still a staunch critic of Trump, just called it all very, very shameful. Lindsey Graham described it as a missed opportunity to hold Russia accountable for meddling in the 2016 election. They're still pushing on that. They've got zero evidence of that. Zero evidence, and they're still pounding on that. Boy, they just cannot let go. Cannot let go. Democratic Representative Eric Swalwell is now out there trying to equate Russian hacking to Pearl Harbor and 9/11. So, according to Swalwell, sending phishing emails and posting memes on Facebook and Twitter is just as evil and vile as Pearl Harbor, the sneak attack, and 9/11. I think he's lost his sense of proportion. I really, really do. The New York Times, though, really jumped the shark. Not only did they produce a video featuring topless feminine protesters demanding Trump put more sanctions on Russia, but also posted a bizarre animated gay love scene between Trump and Putin, which, frankly, I think gays looking at it are going to be offended. Now, as you know, Trump was recently in Great Britain, and there was a lot of media attention on all the anti-Trump marches that were put together to greet him, on the baby balloon that was up there, and, you know, oh my goodness, Trump is unpopular, Trump is unpopular. It turns out there were a lot of pro-Trump rallies. We Love Trump was out there. They didn't get any media coverage, but they were out there. So corporate media has become a big part of the problem, and they're still on the warpath against Trump. And I think it's because, Trump is giving the war party everything they want. He's going where Israel wants. He's bombing the people Israel wants. The only thing he's doing that the establishment doesn't like is trying to close down the open borders. But the vitriol being directed at him. I think it's true that Hillary's going to run in 2020, but she doesn't want to take a chance against running against a successful incumbent. So they're going to have to get him out somehow. That's what this is really all about. She wants to have a GOP candidate who's going to be easy to defeat. She's replaying Richard Nixon's re-election, is what she's doing here. Now, Alan Dershowitz is out with an article talking about the confirmation process for Supreme Court and saying that the Constitution says simply, with the advice and consent of the Senate, that's it. But it's been turned into another political circus delays, demonization, fabricate, discrediting, and votes that are cast largely along party lines. And it wasn't all that long ago that controversial nominees like Antonin Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg were confirmed with hardly any dissents. But now with Kavanaugh, it's just turned into this battle right there on the floor of the Senate. Now, as we mentioned before, that Hillary appears to be getting ready for another run at the White House in 2020. And maybe not. Her support may be vanishing. Her health may be vanishing. She received this Women's Award over the weekend and began her speech by saying she was so tired she could barely stand up. So we need to keep in mind, she is not a well person here. But you remember the Clinton Hollywood Global Initiative? Well, it's shut down. A lot of the donors have now gone away. And everybody's looking back and saying, what did the Hollywood Global Initiative actually do? Did it actually ever do anything? It was being run by a woman who wanted to be president, took in a lot of money. Where did it go? Most of the donations, of course, went to pay for staff, with the CEO making the most. It was all marketing. And all the donations went to somebody's lifestyle. It didn't actually do anything. Well, we know that since Hillary lost the 2016 election, donations to the Clinton Foundation have certainly dried up. And now we're finding out that all the other little scams they had running are losing their support. So I can see why Hillary doesn't want to run against Trump, because her support system is falling apart right now. Okay, apparently during his closed-door meeting with members of Congress, Rosenstein actually threatened to subpoena congressmen. You make me talk to you, I'm going to make you talk to me. And it's getting very testy between the Department of Justice and the Congress. And somebody needs to remind Rosenstein that Congress does have oversight authority over the executive branch. That's what the three divisions of government are supposed to do. Keep an eye on each other in case somebody is doing something wrong. Rod. And I know Donald Trump is accomplishing a lot of good, traveling around the world and meeting with Putin, but he needs to come back home and he needs to start seriously looking at cleaning house, because there is a problem when you have an FBI and a Department of Justice who are refusing to cooperate with congressional investigations into their conduct. There is a problem. Now, Chris Farrell is out there saying that Rosenstein and Mueller want to destroy Trump's presidency. That should be obvious to anybody. Mueller's been running his little investigation for a year and a half, millions of dollars. He's managed to find a couple of indictments for procedural crimes against people that have nothing to do with the Trump-Russia collusion, which was what he was supposed to be investigating. On that issue, he's found nothing. He's found nothing. So it's time to shut it down. Now, I'll be the first one to admit, Trump has been a disappointment for me. But he ran his election. He didn't cheat. He didn't collude with the Russians. He is the president. Deal with it. Now, in another surprising about-face, Trey Gowdy is ruling out the possibility of impeaching Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, saying there's not enough support for his ouster. And this was on CBS's Face the Nation. And Gowdy said, I'm not convinced there is a movement. But there are a lot of people frustrated with Mueller's investigation. And they've targeted Rosenstein for having basically just set this thing up out of thin air, because he didn't follow the statute for a special counsel. Special counsels are appointed after a regular Department of Justice investigation has found evidence of wrongdoing. There was no Department of Justice investigation into the Trump-Russia collusion. Everybody's coming up empty. There shouldn't be a special counsel. And it's weird. Gowdy will be doing really good, really good, really good. Then all of a sudden he'll pull back. Now, watching Peter Strzok in his battles with Congress going back and forth, he's still out there insisting he did nothing wrong, that his dislike of Trump is based on patriotism. But the bias and animus is definitely there. And let's not forget, on Mueller's investigative team, they're all Democrats. Most of them were Hillary Clinton donors. It's hardly a balanced, objective team. But Strzok, before Congress, was openly combative and condescending, was sneering and smirking. And you're wondering, how does somebody like this get to be a person of importance at the FBI? Well, 4 names: James Comey, Jeff Sessions, Rod Rosenstein, and Christopher Wray. And they are to blame for the loss of public confidence and trust in the Department of Justice. Now, a little bit of interesting information has surfaced. It turns out that Peter Strzok not only worked for the FBI, he worked for the CIA at the same time. He worked for CIA for 24 years. His job title was chief of their counter-espionage group. Now, the FBI never had such a unit, which strikes me as odd because I thought that was a big part of what the FBI was supposed to be about. But Strzok, of course, led the FBI's investigation into Hillary Clinton and her use of personal email for classified government business while she was Secretary of State. And she didn't mean to do well, so we're just going to let her go. But apparently back in 1996, a joint CIA-FBI position of counterespionage was created by Congress, and that was filled by Peter Strzok. So he's a heavier hitter than we were given to understand before. Now, a little bit of good news out there in California. The California Democratic Party has given their endorsement for the November elections to Kevin DeLeon instead of Dianne Feinstein. And that, of course, is a stinging rebuke, and without their endorsement, it is highly unlikely that, absent massive election fraud, she will prevail against Kevin DeLeon. That's a major, major endorsement, the party endorsement. So it was a bit of a whoopsie for Feinstein. She's running for a 5th full term. And it basically shows that Democratic activists in California have soured on her reputation. So they're going to go with Kevin DeLeon. Now let's talk about Antifa. They are up in arms, up in masks, over this bill that's being talked about in Congress that would add significant jail time to the commission of an act of violence if you wear a mask during it. Now, it's a revival of a law that was originally passed to deal with the Ku Klux Klan, who wore those little white thingies. And Antifa is against it. They want to be masked. They don't want their identities to be captured by TV cameras. And oddly enough, the corporate media seems to be on their side. And so the corporate media is basically out there saying, yes, it's okay for Antifa to wear masks and commit acts of violence. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I want to go back to the Trump-Putin press conference because I've got a transcript now of Putin's comments regarding Hillary Clinton. And we need to basically enshrine this somewhere, especially as we get closer to 2020. So Putin said, for instance, we can bring up Mr. Browder in this particular case. Business associates of Mr. Browder have earned over $1.5 billion in Russia and never paid any taxes, neither in Russia or the United States, and yet the money escaped the country. They were transferred to the United States. They sent a huge amount of money, $400 million, as a contribution to the campaign of Hillary Clinton. Well, that's their personal case. It might have been legal, the contribution itself, but the way the money was earned was illegal, so we have solid reason to believe that some U.S. intelligence officers accompanied and guided these transactions, so we have an interest in questioning them. So there it is. Hillary Clinton was the one who was getting the benefit of Russian help, $400 million worth of it. All right, we're going to take a phone call here now. Neil in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael, Claire, in the United States of America. This has gone on for, I don't know, years now, year and a half, and I called, the first reason I ever called you was because of this investigation. My theory was Trump knew everything's going to point at her. There's nothing with him about any of this. It's a cover-up of their own collusion. Point the finger. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. So when I heard Putin say what he said today, he literally said, I have your back 100%. This is fake. He wants an investigation. He offered our 1999 law treaty to cooperate lawfully for crimes incorporated into both countries, in and out, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
He put down the precedent, and now he brings that up. The what's his name, with how much money? $1.5 billion ended up into Hillary Clinton's coffer for the election.
No, she didn't get it all. No. What Putin said was that these individuals earned $1.5 billion in Russia and somehow got it out of the country without paying any taxes. Then they turned around and made a $400 million donation to Hillary Clinton.
Just like Mueller helped orchestrate the uranium going to Russia.
Okay, well,
didn't that happen?
We need an investigation on that one. I mean, there's certainly a lot more documentation about the Uranium One deal than there is about Trump-Russia collusion. Anyway, Neil, we got to take another commercial break here, so I'm going to let you go, and we're going to switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. And Dustin, I'll have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Mike, those two wretched Reuters and AP, Associated Press, they're just part of the same group. It's like they didn't ask any questions of importance. Like, hey, you guys are going to give humanitarian aid, because the Russians have been bringing in humanitarian aid to Syria.
Yes.
They don't even care about that. It's just like, Hillary this, Hillary that, And did you notice that Trump says that, it's funny? No server. He kept stringing up. No server. Where's the DNC server? Where's this Hillary's 30,000 missing emails? And he goes, I bet you they wouldn't lose those emails in Russia. So, I mean, it was a classic. Today was like, oh my God, they're all freaking out though. James Clapper, did you hear what he said on CNN? He goes, he should be arrested basically for treason. And he was like smirking. It might have been John Brennan who said it, but I mean, these people are such garbage, Mike. I mean, they're all garbage.
Yep.
And Sky News, Mike, I flipped over to Sky News Live. He's like, how can he question the intelligence agencies? I don't know. Nobody questioned him on Iraq and 9/11, all these supposed great intelligence agencies we got. But because people don't understand, we got 18 intelligence agencies. We only got 3, CIA, NSA, and DIA. And who runs them? Whoever runs them gets they create this myth, and people inside, but not everybody in the CIA, DIA, What a joke. Today was great, though, Mike. I mean, with the soccer ball, him handing him the soccer.
Yep.
Man, tonight is going to be a field day on CNN and Fox. Oh, MSNBC, Rachel Maddow's head's going to spin around, I bet.
That'll be worth seeing.
I wonder, you realize Rachel Maddow gets $30,000 a day? $30,000 a day to lie to us.
Oh,
and that's
man.
just her.
I can't even imagine making that kind of money. It's just so beyond my experience. Anyway, Dustin, stay on the line. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. I'm looking over here on Fox News. They're desperate to just demonize Trump and Putin. They had quotes from former Georgian President Saakashvili. Remember him? He's up in Ukraine now, basically out there saying, Putin meddled in my elections. Putin meddled in my elections. The U.S. owes nothing to Russia and Putin. They don't want anything positive to come of this. Whether it's just because the military-industrial complex makes more money off of you when there's a Cold War, or it's part of this effort to just keep Trump from looking like he's accomplished anything positive heading into the 2020 re-election. Anyway, back to Dustin in New Jersey. Dustin, what's your comment?
Wait, Saakashvili, they let him out of jail?
Yeah, apparently. They were quoting him.
Make sure I hope he has a parachute on him still. When he tried to jump off the building, remember? Yeah, and they brought that up too, Mike, about Georgia, like the pundits. Like even Fox, like you said, Fox News is, people got to stop watching Fox News. It's this part of the same coin, two sides of the same coin. They're like, I mean, the women were just reading off the script. You can tell everybody reads off the script now. They
Yes.
stick within the Sky News. They all stick to the same lines, Mike, the same quotes, the same playbook. If people can't figure it out by now, then they're just stupid. But what a joke. Like, I mean, I turned to Fox News shows like, oh my God, and yeah, they're just going to yank out. I'm waiting for them to get back Ralph Peters and the other guy, Tucker Carlson got in the front, Max Boot. Remember him? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder how much they get paid, But yeah, what a joke, man. But Trump did expose what's going on. I give him that. What he can do about it, I don't know. Not much. I don't know, Mike. Like, it's been all this time, and and then Mike, another thing. Back to Russia. Did you see what Trump said about Putin? He has something to say, like a good idea. To have Mueller's team or whatever go investigate the supposed 12 Russian intelligence officers, and then the Russians will come over here. Maybe they'll talk to Peter Strzok and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, that's not ever going to happen. But that was a pretty cool thing to try to get, because Mueller's not going to go over there. That, or any of his team.
No.
Because that would expose that it's all BS. But all right, Mike, have a good show. That's all
right, thanks an awful lot here, and let's see. I need to scroll back up to get my next caller, so just give me a second here. That would be Fred in Arkansas. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, Mr. Rivero, thanks a lot. You have mentioned a couple of times about a scandal having to do with the Theranos laboratory. You remember that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what I did, I was motivated by what you've said to look into the issue, and I found a paper published in 2016 in the Journal of Clinical Investigation, and it's titled Evaluation of Direct-to-Consumer Low-Volume Lab Tests in Healthy Adults. Now, let me give you a little background. What Theranos tried to do is they wanted people to be able to go into a drugstore and put a little gadget on their finger, and the gadget would poke a little hole in their skin on their finger, and some capillary blood would drain out, and then they would mail the gadget to the Theranos people. Now, this is in contrast to commercial laboratories that generally we require a specimen that is taken through a needle from a vein. So now that's the first issue that you have to understand. A capillary blood specimen is never going to be as accurate as a venous blood specimen because you're squeezing out blood between tissue juices. So it's going to be kind of mixed up, and it's not going to be as reliable.
Yes.
Now, in this study that was carried out, they basically are comparing venipuncture specimens sent to gigantic commercial labs compared to capillary blood specimens sent to Theranos. Now, let me read one brief quote from this paper so you can realize how innocent Theranos is. Here I go now. Indeed, more than 92% of collective measurements reported from LabCorp and Quest, that's the big outfit, greater than 87% of the measurements returned from Theranos were within normal ranges. Generally, test results that were outside their normal ranges were consistent for each individual among all services, with the major exception being lymphocytes and components of the lipid panel. Now, let me repeat. It said greater than 87% were normal for Quest. Well, no, I'm sorry. It's 97% from the big labs, 87% from Theranos. So in other words, Theranos had an error rate about 5% higher than the other labs. But you see, the Theranos specimen is a casual draw, and it should have a false positive rate.
Okay, well, let me interrupt here for a little bit. First of all, it sounds like the difference between Theranos and a regular proper laboratory is closer to 10%, not 5%. But in the end, the investors, basically, I think they looked at that 10% and said they weren't sure that this was really working. And I don't know about you. I don't want to trust my health decisions to a machine that is only, right 9 times out of 10. That to me is unacceptable.
Now, wait, how do you get 10% when it's 92% normal from the big labs and 87% normal from the from Theranos?
You just said it yourself, 87%. That's the success rate from the Theranos labs. So I'm rounding it up to 9 out of 10. That's a 10% failure rate. That's kind of hard to look at in medical gear.
What you're not understanding here is you're either going to have a false positive rate or a false negative rate. And when you're reporting direct to the consumer, if you give him a false negative rate, then he's never going to go to a doctor. And if you give him a false positive rate, then once in a while he's going to go to a doctor, and it'll turn out there was nothing to worry about. So there isn't any such thing as an absolutely correct laboratory test value. The issue is, do you want a false positive rate or do you want a false negative rate? And when the consumer decides on the test all by himself, and it's not under doctor's prescription, the only safe thing is a false positive rate. Now, are you getting that, or you want to disagree with that?
I'm basically saying it's a 10% failure rate. And false negatives can be harmful if they don't go to the doctor, and false positives, they could go to a doctor who's, being incentivized to push vaccines or something else. I've been the victim of a wrongful diagnosis myself, so I kind of know how this feels like. In any event, the phone lines are loading up, and we really do need to get on because we do have a guest in the show later today. So thank you very much, Fred, and we're going to switch on over to James in Tokyo. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. It's nice to talk to you again, although I'm very upset with you. During the election, you would always say that if it came to Hillary and our national mascot, Godzilla, that you would vote for the lizard. And I really don't appreciate that you compare our national mascot to that monster, but after a couple months of therapy, I'm okay now, so I'm calling in again.
Well,
okay?
I'm so glad you got over it.
I want to talk about the destruction of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
Dianne Feinstein, now they're even going for her competitor in California. So the whole Democratic Party has been going down. I got a couple friends who were like really hate Trumpers, and they all don't realize that Trump really destroyed their entire party. They're like pretty much nothing now. They're just a bunch of people on both coasts who have nothing to say. They have no platform. It's just like this Antifa or transgender bender going in the bathrooms or eliminating borders. And that's pretty much all it came down to. And I just don't ever see how they can come back, especially if Trump finally declassifies information related to the whole Russiagate stuff. I don't know. I just want to hear your opinion on that.
Well, the Democratic Party was self-destructing long before Trump came on the scene. It's just because Trump won the election in 2016 that the Democratic Party's failings became publicly visible. The rioting, the crying, the whining, the snowflake behavior. The problem with the whole Russiagate situation, it's an allegation without any proof. There's nothing to declassify. What Trump ought to be doing is declassifying all the information about the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server, and somebody ought to be taking a good look at the books over at the Clinton Foundation. You know, Trump has to realize that Hillary's plan to run in 2020 is the reason he's constantly under attack, and it's time for him to fight back. You know, they want him out of office. They want him not to be able to run in 2020 so that Hillary can walk over whoever the GOP candidate is likely to be. And so it's time for Trump to put on those presidential brass knuckles. And it's great what he did in.
I think the reason.
Say again.
I think the reason Hillary is running is because she is going to be under a lot of indictments, and that she's only running to say that, Trump is just going after me because I'm a political candidate instead of her crimes. But anyway, I appreciate all the info you gave me, and I hope your wife's back's a lot better. By the way.
It is getting better. It's a slow process. It's very frustrating. We had her in physical therapy earlier today, but it is. It's going to take a while, and we just take care of her. And she's not allowed to do housework, and she's not allowed to bend or pick things up or any of that stuff. And next month we're going to see some other specialists that'll tell us how good or bad the osteoporosis is going to be. But again, getting on back to your issue, all it's going to take is one felony conviction. We need a conviction, not just an indictment. One felony conviction, and Hillary Clinton cannot run in 2020.
I believe that too. And hey, Mike, nice talking to you, and give my best to that lovely harp playing angel. You take care, bro. Bye-bye.
I certainly will. Let's switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, how you doing, Mike? Just want to talk a little bit about the Newton conference today. I just came back from the gym, and when I was doing some part of my aerobic workout, I was watching the TV up there, and they had the Fake News Network and the Crap News Network, Fox and CNN. And they were coming across like Trump was committing some kind of treason. Actually, this is the Trump I voted for. And I just want to say something else, too. I only listened to him because I figured he had something to say, and I do like to know what the enemy is saying. I listened a little bit early this morning, going back, and he had on, sure enough, he had on Bill Browder. I'm sure you know who he is, right?
Yes.
The swindler. Anyway, they had this swindler shyster on, okay, talking to him like he was like Saint William the First or so, or the Second or something, and saying how terrible Putin is, how everything is Putin's fault, how he even gave the Syria, or let the Syrians keep that gas, as if it was Assad that did the chemical attack. He accused him of the attack in the Skripals, the whole thing, and Beck went right along with it. He accused him too. I just want to let people understand something. Trump's problem is not just with the left. It's also with part of what calls itself the right. And Glenn Beck is a typical example, because Beck was one of the ones, even during the election, he was one of the first ones to accuse Trump of having the Russians on his side. This guy is a weasel. He's worse than a weasel. He's a rat. He wrote a book called, the only book I ever read of his was the Overton Window, in which nothing but false flags and all that, and yet including at the end was supposed to be a false flag nuclear attack on Las Vegas. And at the same time, he was accusing everybody else of being conspiracy theorists. And he said this book, by the way, was faction, not fiction. So this guy is a total hypocrite. He hates Russia. I think it might have something to do with his miserable excuse for what he calls a religion, which is not really Christianity. Okay, I'm not going to judge. I shouldn't really judge it, because, fine, you can believe what you want. But if you believe that God is some kind of a space alien, and that some space alien, you say an angel, but came down to visit Joseph Smith back in the 1800s in upstate New York, and you believe that kind of stuff, and you believe that's what, don't call it, you shouldn't be calling yourself Christian, because that doesn't go along with, not from what I know of, that doesn't go along with Christianity. It doesn't even go along with Judaism, with, the old cult.
Let's back off here a little bit, because, everybody thinks they've got the true religion, and that other sects or variants, have fallen from the way. Whether it's Protestant versus Methodist versus Unitarian versus whatever. So I need you to come to the point here, because we're at another commercial break.
All right, the point is this. Get wise, people. Understand, it's not only the liberal left. It's also the so-called, at least part of the conservatives, the neocons, and including a lot of your establishment talk radio. Not your type of talk radio, Mike, but the establishment talk radio. They're just as full of it as the left, as the crap news network is. And don't trust Fox either. I call it the fake news network, fake neocon news network. That's all I basically want to say.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you very much for that. And we're going to let you go. And the phone lines are now open. Now, a lot of people have been talking about Anthony Bourdain and his suicide, which I think was actually an accidental death, but we needn't get into the details on that. But apparently, he had done an interview which has just now been released, and apparently it was highly critical of Bill Clinton for being rapey and gropey. And in it, he said he hoped Weinstein would be beaten to death in jail. All right, we've got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, coming up on the top of the hour. And I'm already seeing that this Putin story about the $400 million illegal campaign donation to Hillary Clinton is going viral around the net. So that's a very, very good thing to have that happen. Turning over to the war zones now, the civilian death toll in Afghanistan has hit a record high, according to the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. Apparently, 1,692 civilians have been killed this year, most recorded in the same time period since records began back in 2009. But hey, we got that oil pipeline right of way, and the opium is flowing, so I guess it was all worthwhile. Turning now to Syria, militants are handing over more and more of their military equipment to the Syrian army. And according to the Russian Reconciliation Center for Syria, since the start of the implementation of the reconciliation deal, militants have surrendered 20 battle tanks, 13 armored vehicles, 6 anti-aircraft automatic guns, 13 anti-aircraft guns, 29 mortars, 3 artillery pieces, 83 shoulder-launched anti-tank rocket-propelled grenade launchers, 55 heavy machine guns, and 301 automatic rifles. So the militants are set to surrender even more weapons and equipment in the coming days. So it's going on very well over there. The war is winding down. And I know that's a loss for the war cult, the war fans, if you will. Israel has attacked a Syrian military target up by Nara military airport in Aleppo. This represents a very long reach into northern Syria. Mostly Israel has been bombing on the other side of the border with the Golan. But this time, claiming that they were targeting an Iranian-linked base, they launched these rockets at this facility right next to the international airport. And it was basically a flurry of missile strikes. Now, Israel, of course, is not commenting on the strikes, saying they don't comment on reports which emerge on foreign media. So they're still out there. Now, interestingly enough, there's a news report that came out of Zero Hedge where the U.S. is sending a message to Bashar al-Assad that the U.S. will pull out of Syria if Iran withdraws. Now, obviously, the push to get Iran out of there is originating with Israel. Israel is justifying their attacks on Syria, saying, the Iranians are coming to get us. The Iranians are coming to get us. No, Iran is not coming to get Israel. Israel has nuclear weapons, and we all know it. The interesting issue would be that if Iran pulls out and the U.S. doesn't, what happens? Does Iran come back in? All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. Back with hour 2 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And just before the station break, we were talking about this apparent offer from the United States to Assad that if Iran will withdraw from Syria, so will the United States. So we'll see what comes out of that. However, another article that we have here, this one from Investment Watch blog, despite U.S. and Israeli objections, Russia and Iran remain committed to fighting terrorism in the Levant. So we'll see what happens there. All right, back to the phones. Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Hey, I wanted to point out, I think it was Thursday or Friday, there was articles covered in several outlets that said, I think you ran it on what really happened, about how Benjamin Netanyahu went to Russia, met with Putin within the last 10 days or so, and made the pledge that the U.S. Can get, Israel can get the United States to lift its sanctions.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes.
If Russia, basically does what it wants in Syria, and ask everybody. I mean, if Israel is, and the Israeli lobby is the driving force, which of course it is, on the Iranian sanctions. Now we know that Iran, it costs just Lockheed Boeing alone, about $300 million in contracts for 747s, those sanctions, just that. And how many millions and billions of dollars are sanctioning Russia costing? And the Israelis, with impunity, can say to Putin, well, we can get all this stuff taken away. Just do what we say.
Well, Netanyahu had a specific request, and that was for Russia to convince Iran to leave Syria.
Right. But they're saying also that they can get the United States to remove the sanctions, which I believe them. I believe they can do that. But it just goes to show you, it's costing billions and billions of dollars, and there they are over there pledging to Russia what they can make us do. And by the way, before Trump even went to meet with Putin today or yesterday or whatever it was, he had to go over and meet with Netanyahu to get his marching orders.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what happened. And Israel is bombing further and further away from its border.
Yes.
The quote Iranian things. This is all for Israel. The whole thing is for Israel.
Well, Israel is certainly a major player and a major beneficiary, but there are a lot of other forces at work. I mean,
like who?
Well, oil companies, the central banks.
Well, we're not getting any oil like out of Iraq. And, you know, we never got any oil out of Iraq. And that's what the Israeli lobby always says. Oh, they come back and say, it wasn't for Israel, it was for oil. But we didn't make any of those deals the Chinese did with Iraq.
Yeah,
you know?
but the deals are made for the U.S. dollar. The goal of going into Iraq wasn't to grab the oil, but to make sure it continued to be traded only in the U.S. dollar. I mean, basically, Iraq was invaded almost exactly a year after they announced that they were going to start selling their oil for the euro with the blessing of the United Nations. And Tony Blair flew over to Texas and had a private meeting with George Bush, and that's where they decided they were going to go into Iraq and make sure that Saddam Hussein was brought down and that Iraq's oil was for sale only for the U.S. dollar. Same rationale behind Libya.
Well, I grant you, you're right about that, Mike, but where we differ is that apparently you draw a line and say that the same people who are running Israel and basically running the United States, I'm talking about the lobby, are also the banks. They're the same guys. I know you don't quite agree with that, but there's tremendous overlap. And so, you know, whatever, the banks are the Israeli lobby. I mean, they're the same.
Oh, well, they're certainly tied in. There's no question about that. But, you know, you've got all the defense contractors want these wars to keep on going. Wars and assassinations don't happen for just one reason. There are always multiple players, multiple overlapping interests, and we certainly saw that with the John F. Kennedy assassination, for example.
Like, just to make one point, Israel claiming that they can get the sanctions removed on Iran, on the U.S. sanctions on Iran removed, and that point I made about Lockheed Boeing, you know, hey, they were costing, well, those sanctions cost Lockheed Boeing $500 million.
Yes.
And yet Israel got it through. You know?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's one thing I'll definitely agree with you on, and that is the sheer arrogance that Netanyahu displayed going up to Putin and saying that he could get the U.S. government to lift the anti-Russian sanctions. Personally, I think the sanctions are ridiculous, whether it's against Iran or Russia. In fact, the U.S. is literally isolating itself economically and politically behind all these sanctions, and I think it's a bad policy.
Oh, it's awful. It's costing American businessmen. We're already in a nation recession, and you know, the billions of dollars that we're losing in those sanctions, Mike, might be enough to not have us slip into a recession. You know, maybe, but it's ridiculous. It's killing us.
Yes, it is.
You know, what business we can't do, is circumscribed by some little pissant country in the Middle East that can tell us who we can sell to and who we can't.
Yeah, it's a problem. There's no question about that. Anything else?
I was going to ask one thing. I was under the impression that the CIA and the FBI, as hardwired into their charter of origination, was that the CIA could not operate in the United States and the FBI could not operate overseas.
That's how it was originally set up, where there was an internal domestic intelligence service and then there was the external intelligence service, but they cross into each other's jurisdictions all the time.
Yeah, but this Strzok thing is a formal overlap. I mean, it's saying, you know, Strzok can go into the United States and he can go overseas with the CIA thing, or he can do kind of whatever he wants, apparently.
I mean, Congress set this up back in 1996, where they created a joint position between FBI and CIA of chief of counter-espionage, and Peter Strzok got to be it. And, you know, his job, he's a spy catcher, or at least that's what his job is supposed to be.
Well, but then again, he didn't even look at the. Of course, they didn't place Hillary under oath, and he never looked at the servers and all that stuff. But apparently, when they said that people most of the emails were going to foreign, sites, he didn't care about that either. It came right out in the testimony. I mean,
yeah, and they didn't care about Imran Awan and all the very questionable activity. I mean, if Peter Strzok is our chief of counterespionage, we got spies crawling all over this country right now, because he certainly let the Awan brothers through. They've been given a get out of jail free ticket. He certainly didn't do his due diligence with regard to Hillary Clinton's email server. And again, I think his job was to protect this scandal that could actually bring the entire government down.
And Mike, remember, the whole Flynn thing is only real success, which really had kind of nothing to do with Trump, really. The Flynn thing was all about his trying to meet with Russia on behalf of Israel.
Yes.
To get, to make sure that they voted, so the press overlooks that collusion, and the collusion that goes on all the time, and they go right on Russia. But who are the press? Again, who are the press? Who are the banks?
Well, you got to look at the people at the top. I mean, it's not like everybody working at a newspaper is out there part of this conspiracy. They're just doing what they're told to do in the sure and certain knowledge that if they don't, they will lose their jobs, and they want to keep their jobs. So when the bosses up in the executive office say bash Russia, they're going to say, all right, we'll bash Russia. That's what we're going to do. Certainly shows a lack of integrity and ethics, but in a tough job market, people make moral compromises.
Mike, did you see the article about the New York Times? Amanda Weiss ran it about how they, it was a really nice dissection of the way they completely modify and brainwash us on stories about the Palestinians.
Yes, I did read that. That was a great piece.
What did you think of that?
Oh, no, it's a perfect description of what the New York Times does. Always portray Israel as the victim, always portray Palestine as the aggressor, leave out any mention of anything Israel might have done to have provoked the situation. It's classic yellow journalism.
Yeah, thank God for a small portion, which you're one of the free media that's still free, and it's small, Mike. These billionaires are buying these guys out like they bought out Alex Jones.
Yeah, I know. And if they can't buy us out, they're looking at ways to shut us down. The Democrats want the independent media and an open internet gone by 2020. They want the internet to be just another corporate media content delivery platform that's under their control.
That's clearly what's happening, and everybody out there. This is like you say, a beacon of light. I send money whenever I can, Mike, and I think we all should
appreciate it,
because without this, we're screwed.
Yeah, these are dark times. There's no question about that. No question about that. Anyway, Peter, I'm going to let you go. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network and getting on back to the war zones. It turns out that over in northern Syria, the U.S. has been providing weapons and military equipment to allied Kurds fighting in northern Syria. You get to pay for it all. And just as Washington has ramped up its support for Kurdish units in Syria, the fighters are selling their U.S.-made weapons on the black market to make up for their expenses. This is being reported in the Arabic language Daily Sabah, citing local sources from northern Syria. Now, in keeping with an agreement between the U.S. and Turkey, the Kurdish forces are supposed to withdraw from Manbij and other areas west of the Euphrates rivers and surrender their weapons to the United Nations before the end of the year. So instead of just surrendering the weapons, they're selling them to other militant groups that operate in the same region. Don't really keep good control of that stuff. All right. Israel started bombing Gaza on Friday night and continued through much of the weekend. 2 children have been killed in Gaza City. And according to Al Mizan, the boys were both 14 years old. And they were killed by an Israeli missile that hit the Al-Katiba area of Gaza City. Apparently, Israeli warplanes fired 5 missiles at Al-Katiba building, which actually is a large, unoccupied, and unfinished concrete structure in the heart of Gaza City. They were just going to knock it on down. Another story, this one coming out of Middle East Monitor, the Israeli army is holding wide-scale drills for an invasion of Gaza City. And they're basically training for a ground operation. And it looks to me like Israel's getting ready to move on Palestine. They're talking about outright annexation of the West Bank. And there have been all these provocations. Settlers provoking the local Palestinians, settlers going into Al-Aqsa Mosque, into all kinds of mosques. So Israel's getting ready to do something, and it's not going to be very, very pleasant. And the gunfire down on the Gaza border is continuing. Protesters are still being shot. Now, Adam Gary, who's a geopolitical expert, is out there saying that the American veto power at the UN Security Council has given Israel a feeling of impunity for their daily violations of international laws. Yeah, that's exactly what's going on. If you don't punish bad behavior, the bad behavior will increase. And between the UN veto by the Americans and their nuclear weapons, Israel has to be feeling like they're pretty much on top of the world. So Nikki Haley, who's supposed to be our ambassador to the United Nations, has been acting more like the ambassador of Israel. And she likened the UN Security Council to a shopping center where Zionist propaganda is for sale. Actually, Mr. Kerry said that. And the U.S. envoy to a shopkeeper lying to her customers while trying to insult the intelligence of the whole world. Now, the world is judging our nation by how she behaves at the UN. So this is not happening in a vacuum. Now, when Peter was on the phone, I was talking about this article that came out of Mondoweiss, and it basically is analyzing the New York Times propaganda tricks to distort Israel's latest attacks on Gaza and just trying to reduce Israel's guilt. They distorted the timeline to try and blame the Palestinians. And they talk about the Israeli airstrikes that killed 2 Gazans and the mortar fire from Gaza that wounded 4 Israelis. But they didn't mention 5 days ago, Israel had further choked off cargo shipments into Palestine, into Gaza, which obviously is going to increase tensions in the area. Those people are hungry. They're being starved to death. Spend more time on the Israeli victims than on the Palestinian ones. In fact, the article from the New York Times only named 1 Palestinian by name, even though the New York Times has 2 reporters in Gaza City. So it's all propaganda here. Speaking of propaganda, apparently over in Virginia, Israel advocacy organizations are demanding that history books be rewritten to basically whitewash its military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, policies of land theft, apartheid, and expulsion of Palestinians. And these changes have been proposed to the Virginia Department of Education by the California-based Institute for Curriculum Services, which is a strategic initiative of the Jewish Community Relations Council. In other words, Israel is trying to get all of our textbooks rewritten so that our kids grow up thinking Israel is wonderful and the Palestinians are bad and Israel is the victim and those gosh darn Palestinians, well, they just got what's coming to them here. Now, a lot of people are still talking about the coming nation-state bill, and it's provoked quite a bit of controversy. There are a lot of protests against it, even by Jewish people in the United States and even in Israel itself, because it actually codifies apartheid. It will allow the establishment of Jewish-only communities inside Israel, which is what apartheid is. All right, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. And yes, if you can help out Republic Broadcasting, we do need your help, and there's no such thing as too small a donation. The postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Road, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number to call in with a credit or debit card donation or to pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. So we're talking about this situation in Israel where they're moving forward with this nation-state bill, which, if it passes, and it probably will allow Israel to designate areas of itself as Jewish-only areas, which is apartheid. There's no other word for it. And that's one of the reasons so many people are enraged by the bill and opposing it, because it's going to make Israel's status as an apartheid state basically official and undeniable. And that's why a lot of Jews in the United States and even in Israel are opposed to it, because they're aware that world opinion will turn against them the way it did South Africa if this gets passed. But again, as long as the United States is going to veto any Security Council resolutions, Israel can pretty much do whatever it wants. And along with that bill, Israeli lawmakers are looking at a bill that would limit Palestinians from petitioning the High Court. And specifically petitions filed by Palestinians in the West Bank. And the bill would see administrative petitions transferred to the Jerusalem District Court instead. And what they're basically trying to do is get those pesky Palestinians to stop filing lawsuits over those illegal settlements that are being built on their land. Okay, now, as you know, Jared Kushner and Donald Trump were pushing this deal of the century, is what they were calling it. It's the deal of the century for Palestine and Israel, and it's basically collapsed. It's gone over like a lead balloon. So Trump's promised Middle East peace plan has stalled. And so administration officials are focusing on improving conditions in the Gaza Strip, which they think might get the Palestinian leaders to come back to the negotiating table. Well, that's not going to happen because of a flaw in the deal we pointed out before. The deal is based on the idea that Saudi Arabia and Egypt would deliver the Palestinians on the cheap in return for a more formal Saudi, Egyptian, Israeli, U.S. alliance against Iran. Now, the Palestinians were expected to be satisfied with economic development aid, while their aspirations for their own state were basically thrown in the trash bin. And that's why the deal was a non-starter. Over in the Jordan Valley, apparently settlers are preventing shepherds from grazing their livestock. And basically the settlers chased the shepherds and chased the livestock so that they couldn't settle down and graze. Now the settlers were grazing their sheep in the same area, but they chased the Palestinians out. Now, between 500,000 and 600,000 Israelis currently live in Jewish-only settlements across occupied Palestinian territories in violation of international law. In particular, Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which establishes that the occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies. So, along with being an apartheid state, Israel is a rogue state. They're not complying with international law because they don't have to. They've got Nikki Haley up there at the UN Security Council. Veto, 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 veto. Because that's her job here. Now, there is a lot of tension inside Israel itself. And there's this group of Israeli Jewish feminists called the Women of the Wall, who held their monthly prayer service at the Western Wall in Jerusalem on Friday, only to be assaulted by a group of religious Jewish zealots who threw stones at them, beat them, and even burned their prayer books. Now, that's because, to the Orthodox Jew, women are not allowed in the places of worship. Women's place is in the home. She's in charge of the home. She's the boss of the home, no question about it. But a lot of Jewish women living in Israel, they think it's their time to basically get permission to visit the Wailing Wall and visit the holy sites. And in this case, I agree with them. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we get back to the international news, I'm looking at the headlines on my little news feed app, and I'm watching what's going on the corporate media. They're just launching a war against Donald Trump. Over at Reason.com, they're running a story that Trump's Putin summit is another reminder that Trump prefers dictators to democratic leaders. And they're just uncorking like crazy. Apparently, this woman who tried to set up a business meeting between one of the Trump companies and some people in Russia. And remember, back then, we were all still friends. Apparently, she's now being charged or accused of being part of the meddling system. They're not letting go of that. It's clear the corporate media does not want Trump to come out of this summit looking good. They don't want Trump to have anything positive to take into 2020. That's what's going on here. Okay, now, article that's coming out of Middle East Monitor, what to do in the face of the Israeli escalation in Gaza. These kites and helium balloons, it's falling on deaf ears because people are looking at the magnitude of the missile and bomb attacks on residential areas in Gaza. The Hasbara is pretty much over. People aren't buying it anymore. They're not buying that any of Israel's actions are justified, and they aren't. Israel is abusing those people. They've turned Gaza into a giant open-air prison. They're starving those people. They're starving them even more. They're shooting them simply for protesting. And now they're going to pass a law, basically legally declaring Israel to be an apartheid state. Okay, now, getting on to Iran, apparently British companies trading with Iran are facing U.S. sanctions within weeks. Trump has apparently rejected pleas for exemptions. Remember, they were talking last week, I think it was Michael Pompeo, was saying that some countries, some companies might get waivers to the Iran sanctions. And apparently Trump has said, nope, not going to happen. Sanctions here, sanctions there, sanctions everywhere. And what Trump is really doing, he's teaching the rest of the world that they can get along just fine without the United States. And now's a good time for them to be learning that lesson because of our obvious in-decline empire. Now, a lot of people are starting to talk about Iran's plans if the nuclear deal does collapse, if Trump succeeds in getting the rest of, well, certainly the European countries to pull out of it, I'm sure that China and Russia will stay on board. But Iran has already indicated if anybody else pulls out, the deal is over. They're going to go back to enrichment. They're going to make their own reactor fuel. And they're threatening now to close the Strait of Hormuz in response to all these sanctions. Now, technically, Hormuz is considered an international strait because it's the only gateway between the Persian Gulf and the open sea. And through it travels a huge portion of the oil the world needs. And the U.S. has already said they're going to send warships there to make sure that the Strait of Hormuz remains open. And this might lead to an actual battle between Iran and the United States. And there would be the open door for the war with Iran that everybody's been lusting for. They're putting Iran into a corner. They're literally forcing them to do something that will be the open door invitation, the red carpet, if you will, the bloody red carpet to war here. Now, as you know, here in Hawaii, we're having the Rim of the Pacific Games, RIMPAC. In fact, you probably have been hearing some of the warplanes and helicopters that are flying right outside here over Pearl Harbor. But as you remember, China was disinvited from taking part in RIMPAC. Normally, they have been part of this going back, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago. They were disinvited over the growing tensions in the South China Sea, but apparently they have deployed a surveillance vessel, a Dongdayo class auxiliary general intelligence spy vessel, and it's been spotted basically more or less following the RIMPAC ships around, just seeing what they're doing, what the airplanes are doing. So far, it has stayed in international waters. It has not violated the territorial waters of the United States of America. But of course, the U.S. is already getting very huffy. How dare you spy on us? It's okay for us to spy on you. You're China, but you can't spy on us. We're exceptional. We're America here. Over in North Korea, U.S. and North Korean officials met yesterday to basically work out the logistics of returning the remains of American soldiers killed almost 70 years ago during the start of the Korean War, with the talks offering a chance to ease tensions between the two sides as they then move on to argue over disarmament issues. Now, this is obviously a good thing. It's going to bring closure to those families who are going to finally find out what happened to their loved ones in all the shooting. And it is a chance to accomplish something that I'm pretty sure both sides want to see accomplished. I don't think North Korea wants to hang on to these remains any longer. It's just a matter of, digging them up, putting them in a box, and sending them to the United States. So it's a good starting point. But again, where the deal is likely to fall apart is that North Korea is expecting a step-by-step phase situation. They give up this weapon system, the U.S. eases some sanctions. North Korea gives up the next component of their weapon system, the U.S. eases more sanctions. But Mike Pompeo is out there basically saying that North Korea has to do everything the United States wants first, and only then will the sanctions come on off. All righty, we're going to take a phone call here. Debbie in Ohio. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I am a landlord. For 14 years, this wonderful person has paid her rent, saved out of trouble, a good tenant. And suddenly we get all these letters that they're going to go into the house and search for zoning. I called the zoning department this morning, and they told me, I said, I'm the landlord. I can't make the tenant let you in the house. There's no drugs or nothing. She's a lovely person. Okay. I said, I'm the landlord. You can go in there by yourself. No, I'm not. And my question to you is, do they need a search warrant to go into somebody's house? I mean, the lady said, well, if she doesn't let us in, we've got the police and the police dogs here. I mean, what is going on in this? We're paying for this. We all got bills. One of us got bills so they can go and check the houses. And this is going to be every year. And I've owned this house for 14 years, and nothing's come in the mail about zoning. They want money, and this is not going to end well. I know. I have this bad feeling. So can you tell me, can they just go in somebody's house and look around?
They're supposed to have a warrant. They're supposed to have a warrant and probable cause. But as you point out, our country, unfortunately, is going through this horrible transition where the police are just acting more and more with complete disregard to the Constitution and the rule of law. They're supposed to have a warrant. If I were you, because these laws can vary from state to state, you need to talk to a lawyer.
And I thought so too, but
you need to talk to a lawyer. You need to call your local legal aid.
No, no Section 8 or anything like that. If that's what you're asking me, no.
Okay, well, yeah, you need some legal advice, and I'm not the person to give it to you.
She says my house is messy, not spotless. I don't want anybody coming in here. And they told me, you can go in. I know as a landlord, I'm not allowed to go into a tenant's house. Not at all. I mean, and then the dogs, two police dogs, and the police. And I said, wait a minute. This is a nice person, I mean, she's done nothing.
Okay, well, Debbie, again, the laws vary from state to state, but certainly in California and here in Hawaii, yes, a landlord does have a right to go into a tenant's unit and inspect it, whether it's a safety inspection or a health check. But again, you need to get some legal assistance in your state to find out what your rights are. Okay?
Okay. Thank you, Michael, very much.
Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. And hang on a second. All right, getting on back to the news. Interesting little article that came on out of Global Research up in Canada. Basically saying that the United States does use its nuclear arsenal as a threat on a regular basis. Most people tend to think, well, we bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and maybe that wasn't such a humane thing to do, but the bombs have just sat there in their silos ever since. And no, basically the U.S. does use them as a threat to coerce other nations to go the way the U.S. wants to go. Now, here's an interesting little story. As you know, Mexico has a brand new president, and Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and he is taking a $100,000 pay cut, basically cutting his own salary in half, and he says he may cut it even further. And moreover than that, no public servant can earn more than he does. So he's basically trying to get a budget under control. So that's a good sign. That's a very, very good sign here. Okay, so let's talk about the economic news because, the Dow ended 44 points in the green, but again, it may be more manipulation than anything else here. Right now, the world's largest shipping company is in serious, serious trouble from the trade war. AP Moller Maersk AS is struggling to make a profit this year after the U.S. and China descended into this trade war. Because obviously it's going to hit those container shipping companies. All righty, let's take another phone call. Lenny in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I was listening to your program earlier. I was driving, so I couldn't call in until now. But I want to go back to the deal that was also called offered Putin and Russia to get Iran to pull out of Syria. I have a question. Why should Iran be asked at the end, when they were invited at the invitation of Syria, and they're there legally, as are the Russians? They're all there legally. So why should they be asked to pull out? All right.
This is coming from Israel. Israel is out there. Israel is insisting that Iran is massing inside Syria to invade Israel, and of course that's silly. Israel's got nuclear weapons, but Israel never misses a chance to demonize the Iranians, and they're using the presence of the Iranians to justify these missile strikes deep into Syrian territory. So basically, Israel wants the Iranians out of Syria because they're concerned that Syria may try and regain control of the Golan Heights now that all that oil and gas has been discovered under it.
Well, it is serious, so I wouldn't have a problem with it, would you?
Well, it is serious. I mean, Israel annexed the territory, but no government on earth has recognized Israel's sovereignty over Golan, although Trump was talking about it shortly after he moved the embassy to Jerusalem.
Yeah, well, that solves that. I don't care what Trump says. Truth is truth and facts are facts. I got another question for you. What do you call someone who breaks into your house and steals everything? What do you call that?
A target.
What do you call a person? I mean, what? Huh?
A target.
You call them a target. But what's the crime they committed, though, in the eyes of the police?
When somebody breaking and entering.
It's a thief, right? Breaking in and thieving, right?
Yep.
So why are we calling the Israeli settlers?
Well, we know they're acting illegally. I mean, they're going into the West Bank in violation of international law and setting up these Jewish-only settlements on stolen Palestinian land.
Yeah, but I'm saying that a settler is someone that settles something when there's no one there. They found the land, no one had claim of it, and then they settled on it, right? That's the definition of a settler. Am I correct about that?
Well, that's the definition, but it's a little fuzzy because the American settlers, when they settled the West, that land was in fact occupied and had owners.
Yeah, I know it's the same, and I'm just saying I'm looking at what is being done, but the wording is being changed to fit the crime. If you get what I'm saying.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and the other thing is that, you know, I think it's important to call things as they are. Call things for the reality that we've always called them. Okay. One thing I've noticed about Putin, and anybody can check this, and if they find me wrong, I'll be glad to admit it. But I've never heard this man refer to Palestine or the Palestinians as anything other than Palestine and the Palestinians. He's never called them Gazans. He's never called them West Bankers. He's always referred to Palestine as Palestine, and never even as Israel.
All right, well, Lenny, we got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials coming up on the top of the hour, and our third hour guest, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the economic news, and the retail Mageddon continues. Chicago's last Sears is closing for good. And apparently so many department stores have closed in New York City, it's starting to pose a problem. People are having to travel further and further to buy what they need. We're starting to see that around here. So, I miss Toys R Us. Used to get a lot of ideas just walking around looking at cool stuff. Ron Paul is warning that we are in the biggest bubble in the history of mankind, and when it bursts, it could cut the stock market in half. Now, the question is, will the plunge protection team try and stop it? Will they be able to stop it? Or are they just going to back off and say, we can't do a thing about it here? Now, Italy is starting to talk about lifting the anti-Russia sanctions. And this is coming from Italian Interior Minister Matteo Salvini. And he's making the statement just as the European Council announced this month that the sanctions against Russia will remain in place until January 31st, 2019, 6 months from now. And Salvini came back and said, in our opinion, sanctions don't benefit anyone, including the Italian economy. And during this year in Brussels, Italy plans to raise the issue of reviewing this ineffective policy. Our economies are already so fragile. That's why this whole tariffs, sanctions, trade war idea, it's not good timing. It's not good timing for the United States. It's not good timing for China. Somebody's trying to weaponize the global economy, and I think they're hoisting on their own petard. Over at Tesla, it's not going very well. We're in the final weeks leading up to the company making its Model 3 push, and apparently Elon Musk is out there exclaiming he's going through the most excruciatingly several months that he's ever had. Apparently there was an unreported incident where a worker's leg was damaged from a forklift accident that required amputation, and apparently the plumbing system is so bad employees are having to trudge through raw sewage on the floor of the Fremont plant. So it's not going very good. Now, as you know, Elon Musk got himself involved in the rescue of those boys from the Thai cave, and he was planning on basically building a submarine that he was going to send into the cave to rescue the kids, and a British diver basically looked at the plans and said, it'll never fit, it'll never work. And Elon Musk, who I guess is feeling the stress, came on back with, sorry, pedo guy, you really did ask for it, and now the diver is planning on suing. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We should be back here with our guest, Daniel Amaduri, and Future Money Trends. Stay tuned. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And joining us on Skype right now is Daniel Amaduri from Future Money Trends. And Daniel, thank you for spending some time with us today.
Aloha, and thank you for having me on the show.
Well, I think the obvious first place to start is tell us about Future Money Trends and what it is you're all about.
Sure. I run FutureMoneyTrends.com. It's focused on personal finance and really looking for ideas that are outside of Wall Street. We're trying to make better decisions for our own finances, whether the economy is going to collapse or boom or there's going to be stagflation. I think ultimately your best answer for the economy is looking at you in the mirror. And that's what we focus on at Future Money Trends.
Okay, so let's shift the discussion here. What do you think about the current economy? Which way do you think it's heading?
You know, that's an interesting question, because do we have a real economy right now? You know, with all the emergency measures that started in 2008 and all the misallocation that we've seen for decades and decades by the government, from housing to college to healthcare, that's a very rough forecast, because I used to think it was easier, and I even got lucky predicting the 2008 crisis almost down to the month. But more and more I look at this economy, Michael, and it's very hard to figure it out, because you've actually got some genuinely good things coming out of the United States, specifically because of the dollars that are in the economy with sustainable spending from the tax cut and the rollback of regulation. So that's good on that front. The problem is we are living in an illusionary environment when it comes to many other things in our economy. So if you ask me what's the direction of our economy, I would say the U.S. economy is certainly better than it was 2 years ago, 5 years ago, or maybe even 10 years ago. But we do have some very systemic problems in front of us that ultimately are going to have to get dealt with. And I kind of think I know how they're going to deal with them. You know, from pensions to the actual debt of the government and interest rates being unable to actually go to normalized levels because it would just implode the whole system. I think we are in a direction that will probably remain the same over the next 6 months to a year. I think that's the best answer I could give.
Well, one of the things that makes prognostication difficult is that so much of the economic indicators we get from the government and the corporate media are of, shall we say, questionable accuracy. We know that the unemployment numbers are being fudged. We know that the rate of inflation is being fudged. They don't include food and fuel, which is where inflationary pressures start to show up first in the consumer economy. We think the gross domestic product numbers are also being rigged. And it's almost like the old Soviet Union, where things were breaking down and all the government could think of doing was just try and reassure everybody, it's all okay, it's all okay, it's all okay. And there's this ongoing debate over whether we really have a 2% unemployment rate when the Bureau of Labor Statistics has a number saying that we only have a 62% workforce participation rate. So these two numbers are not really lining up. As you said, government debt is a problem. I would add to that consumer debt. Consumers, we're trying to pay down their debt, but they're being forced to literally live on their credit cards now as prices start going on up. So I'm a little less optimistic about the economy than you are. I think it's very, very fragile right now. And it's one of the reasons why I think the trade war, sanctions and tariffs were not a good idea at this time. Now, what is your take on this?
Well, I think the fragility of the economy, that word is perfect, because just like an egg, it can look, it can look very strong. It can hold in the yolk, but it doesn't take much to crack it, and it can be cracked many different ways. And I think that's the same thing with our economy. It may on the surface, it looks like it's doing okay. It looks like it's chugging along. But the reality is, it's very fragile. It wouldn't take much. It would take a small country blowing out on treasuries, or it could take actually even less than that. It could take a statement from the president of China, or even a smaller country like Russia, which has a very small economy. It wouldn't take much to tip it over. So as far as the tariffs, here's my thought, and I tend to agree with Trump on this, that there is no trade war. The trade war was lost 15 plus years ago. Maybe we have true retaliation, but they sell us a ton of stuff. Now, their real retaliation is in the treasury market if they wanted to, but even that I don't think they're going to do, because what all global leaders want is they want to stay in power, and they want global stability. So that's the one thing I think, I underestimated in the 2008 crisis. I thought that we would go into a systemic crisis and ultimately a global reset right after. Now, that all will still happen, in my opinion. It just didn't happen in 2009 or 2010. But it's because I underestimate the fact that the Federal Reserve, the central bankers around the world, all these people in power, they will do anything they can to keep stability and keep kicking this can down the road.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's going to be what they want to do, and they've kicked this can down the road so much it looks like an old used-up gum wrapper. Back in 2009, when we were dealing with the aftermath of that crisis, we were beginning to see the downside of economic globalism, because this meltdown in the mortgage-backed securities should have been an American problem. And yet, because of all the links between American and European banks, a lot of European banks were put in a very, very serious situation, crisis situation. And we were hearing all these stories about gold bearer bonds, being transferred covertly and all kinds of stuff. And then years after that, we started hearing other stories about how gold that was supposedly being kept in vaults in New York and Paris and London wasn't there anymore. And when countries like Germany demanded the repatriation of their gold, they didn't get back the bars they had sent over. They got back different bars, which turned out to be not as pure. So was the gold simply being rehypothecated? Was it being leased out the back door? And I remember this ridiculous editorial that came out of CNBC saying, well, as long as we have the number on a piece of paper, it doesn't matter if the gold is really there or not, which is going to be hard to sell to the people whose gold it is. Or was the gold used to prop up the banks' keep them from collapsing following 2008? We don't really know. We do know there is an issue with the gold not being there, though.
Sure, and there's also a very serious situation with peak gold, where you haven't had a major discovery in over 20 years. Exploration, you used to be able to get a pretty good return on exploration. They spent more money on exploring for gold in 2012 than ever. In fact, you could probably take it cumulatively, like from 2000 to 2010, that's how much they spent in 2012, 2013, and nothing. I mean, no meaningful deposits, no big, 20 million ounce discoveries that we used to see 40 or 50 years ago. And the supply line is horrendous. And these mining companies, they're making a little money, but they're really not making enough sustainable profits to where they can actually reinvest and explore. And so far, what we're seeing is they're exploring, they're not finding it. But look, with the gold market, it's one of the most manipulated markets in the world. But I really personally don't point it out that often, just because all the markets are manipulated. Even our data, our news is manipulated. Everything is manipulated, as you know. I mean, you run a website called What Really Happened, because of the reason that everything we literally turn to in the mainstream is manipulated. And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but the news just hit right now before this interview that a Russian's been arrested for infiltrating our media.
Yes.
I mean, come on, give me a break. How many people have infiltrated our media over the past 50 years, from the CIA to other foreign governments? But I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, if you didn't believe in the deep state or conspiracy theories before Trump's brought them all out into the open. Whether you hate Trump or love Trump, I think people have to admit, Trump has brought the deep state out to where they are naked. And,
yes.
So then going back to the question about gold, I mean, come on, if they'll try to take out a sitting U.S. president with lies, will they not manipulate the gold price to prop up the most important thing that underpins the entire financial system, the U.S. dollar? Absolutely. Their ability to print and create out of thin air digital currency, their ability to loan money to rich in natural resource economies, emerging markets in Africa and South America. Mm-hmm. Will they not protect that to the death? You're damn right they'll protect that to the death. I mean, on a side note, taking out Trump is a small a task for these people compared to the financial shenanigans they have going on.
Well, I think that the gold prices are being manipulated. I think they're being artificially suppressed so that people won't close their savings accounts and get into metals. People won't empty their stock portfolios and get into metals. And also because these organizations that played fast and loose with other people's gold, they're trying to now buy it back. And obviously they want the lowest possible price that they can get. I think if there wasn't this rigging of the markets going on, that gold would be worth a heck of a lot more than it is right now. But you're right. Everything is rigged. It's all crooked. And Jesse James was right. The banks are the biggest outlaws that are out there. And we're seeing shenanigans with silver. I'm old enough to remember the Bunker Hunt scandal. But that unbridled printing and creation of money, sooner or later, that is going to come back to bite us, because there really isn't anything backing up the value of the dollar. It's not linked to gold. It's not linked to silver. Basically, it's linked to treasury bonds, which represent a promise to take money away from the American people to repay those bonds somewhere down the road with the accumulated interest. And I know that as nations do move out of the U.S. treasuries, and some of them are starting to do it slowly, that the Federal Reserve is just creating money out of thin air to buy up those treasuries. And right now we have this privately owned central bank that now owns, a significant chunk of the outstanding treasury bonds. And that gives them a lot of political power as well. So the lines between monetary policy and domestic policy are starting to get very, very blurry indeed.
Sure, and we can only hope. I have 3 small children, so I certainly don't want the currency to collapse and to have a major crisis. It's going to happen, but I can only hope that the goodwill that the president is making with Russia, and perhaps the goodwill that he made with China when he, brought a little more stability to that region with the recent meeting with the Korean leader. I hope that they'll keep keep it going for a little longer. I know that sounds horrible, but look, I've got little kids, and as much as I can see that everything that's happening and the scams and the fraud that happens, I certainly don't want to see some sort of implosion. It would be nice if there was some sort of concentrated and focused and coordinated reset, because ultimately there's going to have to be a reset. If we could reset this with a tide of gold or silver or commodities, or if the free market, I think Bitcoin, it's just not there. But I mean, if there has to be an alternative to go to before we just see the dollar collapse, and that's the real risk in something like a trade war or these tariffs, is that ultimately China could win that's the problem. They could win at the snap of a finger. The good news is I don't think they want to destroy $1 trillion of treasury holdings that they have.
No, they definitely don't want to do that. And I would like to see something gentle, a gentle reset. Unfortunately, the people who've got the money, they're addicts. They're money junkies. And they don't want to change any of their policies, because right now the money is flowing from the masses into their pockets, and they think that's just the way the world is supposed to be. One way that we could certainly start a gentle reset is to get away from this idea of using a currency that is loaned into circulation at interest, and go back to the system this nation started with, where the government coined the money, was real metal coins, and they spent it into circulation to buy what the government needed. It flowed through commerce without accruing interest, and then was taxed back in the same amount to balance the books and close the cycle. That was an honest money system. And unfortunately, as soon as the revolution was won, you already had bankers in Europe and their allies in the United States trying to undermine that, trying to put the U.S. back into debt to a bank. And we had the first and second banks of the United States, followed by the Federal Reserve. And these are all basically the very same usurious banking system we fought the revolution to be free of.
Absolutely. And a lot of people don't realize, they think the dollar's been around since Adam and Eve. And they don't realize this is like the fifth currency we've used. It depends if you count the continental, but the gold-backed dollar, the thousands of private currencies that were available to us, the competing currencies, the state currencies, the greenback, and of course we actually used to be able to exchange your dollars for gold, and then the dollar was backed by gold for other foreign entities. And then, of course, in 1971, we went to this fiat currency that's just 100%. But what makes the 1971 change so interesting is that it's the first time the whole world went to a fiat system. That has never been tried before. And same thing with the negative interest rates. When a third of the central banks are negative, or they're even negative now, the U.S., when you consider against real inflation, that's never been tried. And that essentially is default. If I loan you $10 and you guarantee you're going to pay me back $9.50, that's not a negative interest rate. That's called default. And that's where we are. But, all these things, I honestly would not have thought they would have been able to fly on a global scale like this. But then you've got, I think it's in Austria where they sold a 100-year bond last year. My goodness, a 100-year bond, and of all things, was like 3%. So it's certainly interesting to see how this is played out. And one thing I have personally learned in my own life is there are a lot of unknowns out there. And so I'm not as certain in my forecast, which is why I do try to bring it back to the individual, what we can do as individuals to prepare ourselves. Because you want to prepare for a crisis. You want to prepare for a global reset. But at the same point in time, you've got to live your life. You ultimately, the people in your lives and this finite time we have on this beautiful planet, you don't want to, get stuck in a rut here. But certainly the problems we face are systemic, and they're very large. And I urge people to definitely prepare.
Well, that's something that we tell people to do here as well. But again, I look at what's going on here, and whether it's the negative interest rates or the fiat currency, I'm not certain it's actually working, because it seems like over the long term, we're definitely headed downhill. One way we could reset the system without changing much of anything is to simply zero out all the accumulated debt. But again, the bankers are not going to go along with that because that debt gives them power over people, over governments, over countries. And so we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. I mean, Congress has the authority to rescind the charter of the Federal Reserve and go back to an honest money system, but they'll never do it because Wall Street is such a great campaign donor every election cycle. But something's going to break. There's no question in my mind something's going to break. We're going to reach a point where enough countries around the world are going to stop going through the U.S. dollar because of that interest that is being paid for, or because it's now seen as unreliable, where we're going to see our economic system start to come apart, because making money off our money is the main business of the United States. We've allowed our manufacturing to decline over the last 30 years. We don't make things people want. Even our weapon systems, overpriced, not working very well. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. And so the U.S. has literally run out of ways to earn a livelihood. And instead, they're playing global games with their paper currency. And I don't see that as likely to turn out very well. I don't see our economy as robust and resilient enough to sustain a trade war. And, you know, we'll see all this stuff about how, oh, my goodness, this company's added 10 jobs and that company's added 10 jobs. But as one of my callers earlier in the show was pointing on out, if you look at Trump's sanctions on Iran, that's cost Boeing a huge amount of money, because Iran was buying 747s from Boeing. And now Iran may turn to Russia, or they may just develop their own domestic airline industry. Anyway, we have to take a 3-minute break for commercials, Daniel, so stay on the line and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Daniel Amaduri of Future Money Trends. And I would like to move on to the topic of wealth inequality, because for an economy to operate, you've got to have currency flowing freely at all levels of the society and into all necessary sectors of development. But because of the way taxes have been rewritten in recent years, the money basically flows to the top and it just sits there. There's no recycling down to the bottom. And we're seeing it in the collapse of the consumer economy. We're seeing in this insane drive to keep wages and salaries way down, even as prices and rents and everything else is going up. And it just seems like our national economic policy is not being well thought out. It's just being driven by greed. And if there's an area that needs rebalancing right now, it's that ordinary working people, middle-class people, they have to be able to have jobs that pay them well enough where they can go on out and buy the products in the shopping malls. And that's not happening. And from where I sit, the degree of wealth inequality, which is, I think, at an all-time record high, is only getting worse because of the way things, the way the tax codes are written.
And I think there's a transition too with the freelance economy, and it's very unfortunate that not only are they manipulating corporations into they're feeding their greed essentially with this cheap money and these loans where they do these buybacks. It helps the people in stocks, which is great because those are, people who, have 401ks and savings accounts and they're investing, but the vast majority of people don't own stock.
Yes.
And then when it comes to wages, they've literally regulated and put so much weight on employers and businesses where they've made employees a liability. And that's very unfortunate, because I know as a business owner, it's not easy. It's not as easy as it should be. It should be very simple to hire somebody. It should be very simple to give somebody some sort of permanent relationship with you where you're working with them. But because of the regulations and the tax code and, even Obamacare, where you're responsible for all these different things, you're responsible for someone's health care, I'm responsible for their retirement. And then again, this all came from the government. When they did the wage freezes back in the 70s, employers needed something to bring people in, so they started using healthcare as an incentive. And now here we are. Now, so a lot of people have gone, a lot of businesses have gone the independent contractor way.
Yes.
Well, luckily, technology has helped a little bit to where, if you are a freelancer or forced into the independent contractor world, it's $10 for a website. You have social networking. It's definitely possible. And I think actually, I at this point, I would encourage people just to embrace it and make the best of it, because the idea of what the baby boomers had is not going to happen for the millennials or the generation after the millennials. But it's very unfortunate what's happened to this country, and I'm sure globalization had a lot to do with it as well. So we have had a higher quality of life, but the wages have not gone up. It's incredible. When you look at a chart for houses, for college, for healthcare costs, for almost anything in our lives, the charts are nice and smooth going up. Some of them go parabolic, like college and healthcare.
Yes.
But it blows me away when you look at the wages. The wages have not gone up at all for 17 years. It's an incredible thing that's happened here in the United States, and no one really talks about it when they're they talk about wage equality, but that's about as far as they'll go. Nobody really talks about any solutions, and if anything, we're just rewarding the big corporations, and we're rewarding them with more cheap money, and this is just going to go on no matter what, whether it's Republican or Democrat. Nothing really changes because ultimately the source of this problem is the Federal Reserve System itself.
Yes.
And that is the cancer that they do not want to address.
You're absolutely right about that. And again, as I said earlier in the hour, it's basically the same type of predatory banking we fought the revolution to break free of, only to get sold back into its slavery by a corrupt Congress and a corrupt president a little over 100 years ago. Now, as you know, we're coming up on, no, I got another minute here. As you know, we got a new tax code courtesy of the Trump administration, and it was promised that 70% of the tax cut would go to workers, and it didn't work out that way. The corporations took their additional money and started buying back their own stock. And so again, we're rewarding the wrong people in our society, and because politicians will basically vote with their wallets, corporations and their lobbyists can come on in and basically get pretty much everything they want. I mean, look when 2008 happened, and it was TARP and bailouts and QE and all the rest of it. And these members of Congress weren't looking after the American people. They were looking after their own stock portfolios that were at risk from the meltdown of the mortgage-backed security. Okay, now we got to take another break for commercials. This one will be 4 minutes long, and we'll be back with Daniel Amaduri after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking with Daniel Amaduri from Future Money Trends. And Daniel, looking at our economy right now, again, I want to go back to this issue of the tariffs and the sanctions. I think our economy can't survive it. And right now, we're seeing a lot of economic activity where companies are trying to build up their inventories of raw materials before the tariffs take effect. But that may make the market look good immediately, but it's just building inventory. It's not, they're not shipping and selling finished supply. So I think that the tariff fear, if you will, is having a temporarily positive effect, but I think we're going to see a major decline for the rest of the year because of all this nonsense.
Well, we've been in decline for 20 some odd years because this nonsense has been happening to us without doing anything about it. So I don't know, there probably will be short-term pain relative to the size of our economy and relative to global trade. I don't even think the tariffs are 0.5% of global trade. So I don't want to blow it off, but it's also, in context, it's very small. And we have to keep in mind that we have had tariffs placed on us as Americans, our goods going to other countries forever. And for the last 20 years by China and even Mexico and Canada. Despite the whole idea of free trade and NAFTA, the tariffs have been happening on the U.S. products for a long time. Same thing, and presidents talked about this as well with the EU. So, look, we've been in decline for 20 years, serious decline. For 20 years, we've been in decline for probably 50. But you can look, these tariffs that Trump's putting on and the retaliation, I mean, they can retaliate again, but, if I'm your customer and, you sell me one thing and I sell you 10 things, I purchase 10 things from you and you purchase one thing from me. I think the U.S. Has an upper hand in the sense that we have less things that they can put tariffs on, and they're already putting tariffs on us. I would call ours retaliatory, not the ones that they put on us. So in my opinion, the economy is very fragile, like you said before. People could hurt the economy, or the governments could hurt the economy without any tariff or trade war. They could hurt us. We're most vulnerable in the treasury market, and they know that. And it's a matter of not even they don't even have to blow out the bid on treasuries. All they have to do is put out a statement, and or for China's purposes, since they've been selling long term and buying short term, all they have to do is allow these things to mature, and they can actually exit the treasury market without even selling treasuries. They can exit it just by letting them mature and not buying more, not recycling the money in.
Okay.
So for me, I don't know if the tariffs are that big of a problem as the treasury market. I think that's where they could really hurt us if they wanted to.
Well, there's definitely a risk factor in the treasury market here. But my concern about the sanctions and the tariffs is they're being overused, and it's carrying with it not just an economic cost, but a political one. And I think carried to too far a level, it's going to isolate the United States economically and politically. We're starting to already see other countries that just don't want to seem to do business with us anymore, no matter what the price situation is. And I think a lot of countries are starting to get a view of Donald Trump that he's just throwing his weight around a little too much. And he certainly got a rebuke when he was over there at the NATO summit. Where he was told, you got to take care of the allies you've got, because we really don't rule the world anymore. So getting on back to being prepared, let's bring it down to the personal level. What do you recommend for ordinary people like you and I and our listeners to do to be prepared to weather a potential storm?
I think the first thing is information. People are flooding their head with bad information. I would say when it comes to CNN and Fox and MSNBC and these main channels, just completely disregard them. When it comes to social networking, don't allow them to suck you in to this unhealthy environment for your mind and getting focused on all the politics and the hysteria of the day. It's gotten out of control. So for your own health, don't watch the regular news. Watch, go to whatreallyhappened.com. Check out websites, that there is other alternative media. Go to futuremoneytrends.com. But I would not get my information from these CIA-backed news agencies. They've proven themselves to be completely illegitimate just in the past few years. They've really shown themselves and exposed themselves. So the first preparation is just getting your mind right. But then, you have to go back to sustainability for your own life. If you can see all the things that are wrong with the U.S. government and the current economy, make sure those same things don't apply to your own life. So make sure you don't have consumer debt. Make sure you do everything you can to have a sustainable lifestyle. Get your bills down. Move to another state with low taxes. Move to another region with lower expenses, and really have a sustainable life. I think many of us have been robbed of a life because of this chase of consumerism and debt and these brands and all this nonsense where we've missed out on this life. So prepare your mind, prepare your life with sustainability. And then I think you should ultimately come back to some honest money. You want to own some gold and silver, not because you think that they're going to go to the moon, but because you think that you can preserve your wealth and you'll want that insurance in case there's a systemic crisis. You also need to plan with your family. What are you going to do if there is a grid failure in the U.S. economy? What are you going to do if there is a currency crisis? Do you have enough water to go for 30 days or 3 months Do you have enough food? And a lot of people think I'm crazy when they come to my house and they see different things, you know, like food preparation. And they say, you'll never need that much food. And I said, I sure hope not. But you know what? I'm not just preparing for myself. Look, let's be real, guys. If you're listening to this show and you're buying food preparation stuff, you're not going to let the 5-year-old across the street die. You're not going to let somebody with a 1-year-old baby starve to death. So don't just prepare for yourself. Prepare for as many people as you can, because in that time of crisis, you're going to need people. People are going to be your best assets. You know, you're going to want somebody to help. If we're in a situation where there's a complete reset and there's hyperinflation or some sort of crisis or there's fires in the street, you know, consider all the people that live around you as an asset, and also just be real with yourself. You know, it's you know, when you're watching Hollywood and you're watching a Walking Dead show or something, it's very easy to pretend that you could be Superman and, you know, this incredible sniper or you know, heartless and make the toughest decisions. But in reality, that's just not the case. And I think when you are preparing, I do think people should prepare for other people. And a lot of people say, well, they get what they get because they didn't prepare. But let's be real. There's a lot of children, and how are they supposed to prepare for themselves, even if their parents are ignoramuses? I think one of the things that people should consider when they're doing food prep or they're buying, you know, gold and silver or guns and ammo, I think you should really think of the big picture, that you might be a potential leader during a very, very harsh crisis, which could happen. And people think it can't happen. But look, the Soviet Union collapsed. And, you know, 30 years ago, that was a mega power. And, you know, right now, the U.S. Is kind of, you know, its goodwill is done. It's stepped on a lot of toes. It's killed a lot of people with drones. And a lot of people are tired of this this U.S. rule. Now, we still have the 4,000 nuclear warheads or so that back the U.S. dollar. But even that is becoming less relevant because there are other superpowers that don't want to play these games. They don't have to play these games. You know, it's one thing that the world learned with Saddam Hussein is if you have a nuclear weapon, the United States will, if you don't have a nuclear weapon, you'll get invaded. But if you do, you'll get a summit. So I think there's enough powers out there in the world that when things do change, I think Americans should be prepared for a drastic change in lifestyle.
Well, I'm absolutely in agreement with what you're saying here. We talk about prepping a lot on the show, and a lot of what we say kind of overlaps. If you want to get into silver, one of the easiest ways that you can is go out and buy what is called junk silver. Now, these are the pre-1965 coins that are made of silver. The dimes and quarters are, the nickels are real nickel. And it's a very inexpensive way to start collecting precious metals. But more importantly, it is a known and recognized unit of denomination, where if there is a major upheaval, it's going to be the new currency. And you will buy and sell things with these coins that have an intrinsic value. So, Daniel, we're going to take a quick phone call here, and then I'm going to come back to here. Murr in Wisconsin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. I just wanted to give some really good news, and you won't hear it on the Bolshevik news. There's a brand new state in South Africa. They just raised the flag at 11 p.m. their time last night. The Khoi. Have you heard of them? How? Karen Smith is who I just heard this from.
I have not heard anything about it, and thank you for the information. I will definitely look into that. And if you don't mind, I'm sorry?
I'm sending you the link. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sending you the link. I just wanted your listeners to hear. This is good news. Some people will know.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. And we're going to let you go and get on back to Daniel Amaduri. So we're talking about prepping. We're talking about being able to get your hands on silver and some gold and planning to feed your neighborhood. Now, for some of us who live in very tiny accommodations, that may not be practical. You may want to think about getting a storage shed. But the other reason to plan about feeding your neighborhood is once people know you're a prepper, you become a potential target. And so there's like a running joke out there. The first rule of Prepper Club is we don't talk about Prepper Club. But we always want to try and encourage other people to be ready. And another one of the jokes that we have around here is, how do you tell who's a prepper? They're the ones not eating out of the trash dumpster following a natural disaster, which, as you know, we've had a bunch of them out here in Hawaii lately. So we do need to be prepared. Bad things happen, whether it's from the weather, volcano, government, war, and a certain degree of preparedness is necessary. And I understand why those institutions of government that are trying to basically increase your dependency on them are sort of opposed to that. They don't want people to be able to live their lives and conduct business without the government, because dependency is slavery. So we're coming up here. We've got about another 5 minutes in this segment, followed by about another 4 minutes in our final segment. Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners?
You know, I would just comment on the gold and silver. The prices right now are super cheap relative to how much it costs to mine. And even the numismatic coins, which I would never recommend, and I think they're a scam pretty much. However, I've got to say, the numismatic coins, which sometimes have a 50% premium on them during good times, during good gold market times, are selling for about $10 more than an American Eagle. So there are a lot of great deals out there right now, and even numismatics, which again, I only want the ounce. I don't care about the historical thing. But the fact of the matter is I can buy that ounce that does have that historical value for like $10 more on a $1,300 purchase. And that's a pretty good deal, because if we do go to some crisis times, which I think we both agree that we are, those premiums will go up. So, I mean, look, I'm definitely not a proponent. I've never advocated those, but they're selling for the same cost as an ounce of gold, so why not?
Well, absolutely, and of course, gold is a good thing to own here. And one little warning you have to keep in mind, and I learned this one myself the hard way, those gold coins lose their value if you eat that chocolate bit out of the middle. All right, not so funny. I take it back. All righty. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. If you don't have anything else, then I think we're going to let you go, and I'm going to fill in the rest of the show with some news here. So is there anything else you want to say?
Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, thank you very much.
If everybody can check us out at Future Money. Yeah, check us out at FutureMoneyTrends.com. You can subscribe to my weekly Wealth Digest. And look, I've been prepping for, 15, 16 years now. And if you have any questions, please email me at Daniel@FutureMoneyTrends.com.
Okay, that's FutureMoneyTrends.com once again. And Daniel, we'll have you back on the show in the not very distant future.
Thanks, Michael.
All right.
We're going.
All right, thank you. Now, first of all, before I get back to the news here, I'm watching as the corporate media just uncork on Donald Trump. And they're coming out with some outrageous things here, about how this proves he likes dictators and tyrants. His meeting with Putin is being called treason, above high crimes and misdemeanors. They're trying to turn this summit meeting into an impeachable offense. They absolutely do not want Trump to get anything good out of this summit. And, of course, they're destroying their own credibility. Their ratings are in the Al-Qaeda here. But this has to be about Hillary in 2020. This has to be about Hillary running again in 2020 and not wanting to run against Donald Trump. So they have to destroy Trump in the eyes of the GOP party. So anyway, getting on back to the economic news. Amazon's European workers have gone on strike as Jeff Bezos' net worth tops $150 billion. He's now the richest man in the world. And the European workers were boycotting the company ahead of the global Prime Day. And they ran into problems with that. Apparently, the site crashed and left thousands of shoppers unable to make purchases. So, didn't go very well over there. Okay, over in San Francisco, they have a new mayor, and London Breed. She's a Democrat, Trump hater, black, female, covered all the liberal bases, and basically came on out on her press conference, said, she's committed to making the increasingly expensive and unlivable city accessible to people from all socioeconomic backgrounds. In other words, she's going to maintain the sanctuary city status. And it's not looking too good. More about that when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, final segment of our program today on this Monday. We're talking about San Francisco's new mayor, London Breed, and she's already out there saying sanctuary city, grabbed her mic and basically directed remarks right at Trump about we're going to do this. Her first order of business apparently is responding to the complaints about all the raw sewage in the streets there. And so apparently she's announced a plan to ask vagrants to kindly refrain from pooing on the street. Well, where are they going to go? That's the problem. Now, what was really interesting is this London Breed was taking a stroll down the street. The press was with her. And the camera actually caught a druggie shooting up. I mean, right there in the foreground. And apparently, this mayor wants to set up safe injection stations where you can inject your drugs, you know, under supervision. And I don't think that's necessarily a solution to what's going on here. Somebody anonymously took out a full-page ad in the San Franciscan warning residents to watch your backs because the city can't do anything about the homeless crisis, which certainly seems to be the case here. And have you noticed all these so-called liberal strongholds? They're turning into cesspools. You got raw sewage, and everybody's out there talking, oh, climate change, climate change. Forget about climate change. Why did you clean up the streets? Why don't you clean up these cities? Now, over in Washington, D.C., there's apparently been some kind of a contamination of the water supply. D.C. Water is advising tens of thousands of residents and businesses in a major part of the city to not drink or cook with tap water without boiling it first because of a contamination risk. So the water safety issue is spreading all across the country. It began in Flint, Michigan. Now it's in Washington, D.C. We're very lucky here in Hawaii. We've got very, very good water. Now here is a little bit of silliness. And this is coming on out of 12160. Apparently, a group of neighbors got together and pooled their money to build a paddling pool for their kids. And they've been told by officials they have to drain it and take it down every single night because it's a health and safety risk if anyone should try and break into a nearby home. That's literally what they're saying. They have to remove the communal paddling pool. It poses a risk to burglars. I'm sorry. I don't really care if a burglar trips and breaks their leg or something. Serves them right for being a burglar. Okay, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to get stuff done today. And stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. And take what you learn here, share it with everybody. We're in a war for the truth. And times are difficult. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Please donate to me. And we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, Excuse me, got the hiccups all of a sudden. Aloha, America.